Well, hi everyone. I'm super glad you're here. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. I see some new faces. I really appreciate you being here. And I want to say I'm so grateful for the Wild West team, the Black Hills team for inviting me. This is going to be a slightly different presentation than probably the rest of the presentations you're going to today. Today, I'm trying to reach folks who are interested in privacy. I really see privacy as being something exciting and new, and I'm hoping to teach you a little bit about privacy as part of your InfoSec background and information. Can everybody hear me in the back? We're good? Awesome. Can you see me? Do you like my lipstick? I picked it just for this. I realized today that I'm a bit overdressed, but you have to understand, I live in Florida, so I live in t-shirt and shorts and maybe flip-flops, so I have an opportunity to dress up. So that is why I'm a little overdressed. I realized I'm overdressed for the event. So today, what we're going to be talking about is what cybersecurity people need to know about privacy, and it's October, it's college football, it's NFL season. If I'm not thinking about privacy or security, I'm thinking about football. So I thought I'd go with a little football theme here. I hope you appreciate it today. Again, thank you for being here. Let's get started. I'm Kelli Tarala. As Jeff has mentioned, I'm involved with the CIS controls. I actually stepped away with version 8. That was my last version I worked with. I've been doing information security for about 25 years. It's been a long time. I started out working on the help desk, worked up to server admin, network admin. Then I said, hey, I kind of like this strategy, governance, policy thing. That's when I stopped having friends, except when I watch football. But I really see my role in this industry is to help people with the stuff that most people don't like to do. I'm an English major. I like to write policies. And one of my gifts is I allow people, or I help people to understand frameworks and how things fit together. So I actually see myself as a help or an advocate for the great work that you guys do, because in most situations, I don't understand. Alyssa's presentation was amazing. There were parts of it I didn't understand. But today, so I also write coursework for the SANS Institute on the CIS controls. We have a great risk management 2-day class if you're interested. Also, some of the things I'll be talking about today, you'll find on our website, auditscripts.com. So that is who I am. Okay, I mentioned I'm sticking with the football playbook today. Here's the topics we're going to be talking about today. Some might call it an agenda. Privacy is not a rival team. Be ready to play in any condition. Build your personal bench strength. Scouting. All right, it's time to go. You're up. It's ready to play. Game on. Game one for both security and privacy. Privacy. Let's talk about privacy a little bit. On the slide ahead, privacy is not a rival. Today in most organizations, privacy sits where? Legal, compliance, maybe HR. It's the people who write those policies that nobody reads, if it's on the website, if it's in your employee handbook. But the reason we're talking about privacy today is, well, our legislative bodies, both at the state level and at the federal level, are talking about it. We've got state organizations, country organizations who are talking about it, GDPR. We've got APEC over in Asia. What we're going to talk about, first of all, is when we say privacy, what are we talking about? We've all heard, I've got a right to privacy, I have a constitutional right. What exactly are we talking about? I think the first one, the right to be left alone, I think we all get that one. Limited access to the self. I don't want people to be able to look into my windows in my house. I want to be able to say, this is what my name is. I want to be able to fill out that application and say, if I'm male or female, if I don't want to tell you that, if I feel more comfortable leaving it blank. So one of the aspects of privacy, one of these hard to understand concepts, is the limited access to the self. We are each such beautiful and unique creatures. We want to be able to control the message, just like we do with our social media accounts. So this is another aspect of privacy. Secrecy, the concealment or the containment of certain facts about ourselves. So believe it or not, I have a bad habit. That bad habit is I'm a terrible procrastinator. In fact, I was a couple hours ago tweaking my slide deck, adding a few elements. Maybe when I'm talking to prospective clients or employers, I don't want to tell them that I'm a horrible procrastinator. That may be an example of some sort of secrecy or privacy angle that I want to protect about myself. I also want to control personal information, the ability to say who I am, what my, like I mentioned before, what my gender is, what my favorite color is, where I live. Considering how much information is out in the world about us today, the ability to control that and say who has it or who doesn't, or how they're using it, is becoming more and more important to each of us as citizens, as individuals, and as country members. The next one, personhood. I alluded to this a little bit, but this is really about the dignity of who a person is. And I'm so glad we're seeing so much more in the press about being able to say who we are as a person, if we're religious, if we're not religious, if we're a particular gender, if we're not, if we want to report on an application form, what our ethnic background is, the ability to control who I am, who my personality is, my individuality, is all an aspect of privacy that, as I mentioned, and you're probably saying, oh yeah, duh, that is kind of a privacy angle. But until we sit and talk about it, privacy is such an expansive topic that I'm really glad you're here listening to this talk today, because these things, all 6 of these, are super important to me, and I'm guessing they're super important to you as well. The last one on here, did you know that we were going to talk about intimacy this afternoon? I bet you didn't, but it's not that kind of intimacy. I'm talking about how I want to communicate my relationships or types of relationships with other people. If I belong to a particular church, I want to be able to say, yes, I belong to that church. No, I don't belong to that church. I may not feel comfortable standing up here saying I'm a Scientologist, or I might not feel comfortable standing up here saying I'm Christian. Each person has their individual beliefs. Nothing's good or bad. This is no moral judgment, but I want to be able to have that control over that information. So these are 6 basic privacy types that we're aware of, we know about, we think about, and I just wanted to put this up on there. This actually came from a book from a law professor. His name is Daniel Sola. Understanding Privacy. It's a fabulous book. If you've got nothing to do on the way home on the airplane, it's a great book that actually talks a little bit more about privacy. And on the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about privacy harms. We have this idea of what privacy is. What are privacy harms? And the best thing I can do right now is just to read this to you. Privacy concerns and protections don't exist for their own sake. We don't do it just for compliance reasons. We have privacy controls and privacy regulations because they've been provoked by a particular problem. We know people have been discriminated against because of perhaps a gender or a race or an can't even say that word, their ethnic background that they've put on an application. The reason why we're talking about privacy is because there's been a problem that has impinged, prevented our ability to do some of our actions. That's why we're having these conversations. That's why our legislative branches are having those conversations as well. So let's take a look at what we mean by privacy harms. So again, Professor Solov has talked about privacy harms. As you can see up here, we've got physical harms, harms to our physical state, where we live, how we live, our physical person. We have economic harms, reputational harms. If somebody says, well, she's that kind of person, I heard that she shoplifts, that could be an example of a reputational harm. Or she embezzled money from the company she was at. That could be an example of a reputational harm. Psychological harm, boy, we could have a whole presentation on Twitter and psychological harms here. The sort of vitriol and attacks we've seen on Twitter undoubtedly has led to emotional distress for us, our friends, our colleagues. We're trying to avoid it, but we all know what happens, or we try and avoid it ourselves. Even just a disturbance, if somebody provokes us and says something that's not true, that's an example of a privacy psychological harm. Autonomy harms. Here we're getting into how people are using information about us or impugning our privacy for we could have coercion, manipulation, failure to inform. If I were to ask each and every one of you, I bet each of you has a story about how maybe somebody had some information about you that they didn't, and they wanted to shape your opinion. How many of you are getting text messages from a political party on your phone, and you're like, how the heck did they get my cell phone number? Anybody have that? Yeah, it's kind of irritating. I feel like that's a bit of manipulation, or it even could be a failure to inform me. How did you get my cell phone number? Well, obviously I entered it somewhere, but this is an example of an autonomy harm. We have discrimination harms. We have relationship harms. So this is a little bit different than cybersecurity and controls and encryption. Those things are fairly black and white, and we can understand those. But at this point, I like to tell people that privacy is a bit more squishy. We have to think about how people, not systems, but how people are impacted by the presence or the absence of privacy. And one of the challenges we've seen is dealing with privacy harms in the court system has been very difficult. But that's a whole nother conversation, a whole nother presentation. So these are the types of privacy harms that we identify with, we've seen in the news. And this is just one side of the story that perhaps we don't get the full picture on. Okay, now let me rein this back in and talk about our day jobs, our work, our careers. What does this mean for talking about privacy, not only as an individual, but as somebody who's at an organization? Privacy is not a rival. Privacy is not a team to fight against. I know in some organizations I've spoken with, there is a bit of tension. There's a privacy silo. There's a cybersecurity silo. There really shouldn't be. These teams are focused on the same things. You all know this, the CIA triad: confidentiality, availability, integrity. I didn't even do that in the right order. But what I would like to see is a better understanding with cybersecurity people with privacy. And the intention of my talk today is just to give you a real quick introduction to these privacy harms, these ideas of privacy protections, and what you need to know. So when you go back into the office later this week or maybe next week, you'll have a bit of familiarity with what's going on in the news. There are two big deals, two big information updates I need to provide to you. First of all is the American Data Privacy and Protection Act. This is proposed federal legislation. Anybody know the last time the US passed a federal privacy law? It's older than some of us. It was back in the 1970s. The American Data Privacy and Protection Act, basically what we're trying to do at the federal level is to incorporate some basic ideas about data collection, data modification, and data transparency. That's basically what you need to know about that proposed legislation. It's stalled again right now. It will probably be stalled for the rest of the year. It may come back up next year. It got a bit of traction, but as most legislation we see in Congress, it's tied to other packages, other initiatives. So it's not just a clean privacy bill. It's complicated because it also involves some of those other bills. Anybody hear about the new transatlantic data privacy framework? Oh, I see some heads shaking. This is actually super exciting news. What this is, have you guys heard the term safe harbor, privacy shield, European Union? Okay, this is the new updated draft agreement. This was an executive order that President Biden signed last week. So just a quick little history. We had these overarching frameworks called the Privacy Shield and Safe Harbor that allowed organizations to share data back and forth between the US and countries in the European Union. Well, along came this guy named Edward Snowden, and he sort of told a bunch of stuff that he probably shouldn't have, upset the European Union about the United States surveillance tactics, especially in terms of privacy with the European Union. Now, I'm going to take a quick little tangent here. There's a big difference between the European Union and the United States that maybe a lot of people don't realize. Here, we talked about privacy. I talked about those privacy harms. And privacy is a nice thing. A lot of people say, well, it's in the Constitution. It technically isn't in the Constitution. It's in there in a roundabout way. But if you're a European citizen, privacy is a universal human right. So the challenge has been our view in the United States about what privacy is and what a European Union citizen's idea of privacy is are really quite different. So we have these overarching agreements between their countries and our country on how to share data about people and about their location and critical personal information like that. We used to have this privacy shield. We used to have safe harbor. The new transatlantic data privacy framework is to replace that. It's a way to build trust with the European Union again. A big piece of this is techniques and guidelines for US surveillance techniques. Maybe some of you are with the federal government, maybe not, but from an organization, enterprise point of view, if you're already under the privacy shield and already certified, you get certified by the US Department of Congress, you'll be in a pretty good position when that draft agreement is finalized. There's also quite a number of state level comprehensive privacy bills about data modification, data collection, meaning what do you do with my data? You told me you're taking it for an email list. Now all of a sudden you sold it to another company or a data broker or somebody else. So a lot of states, in the absence of the federal legislation, have put into effect comprehensive privacy bills at the state level. Well, we all heard of California, right? California was a leading edge, bleeding edge on consumer privacy rights. We have Nevada, we have Massachusetts, we have Virginia. Michigan now has proposed privacy bills. So there's a lot of information going on. There's being a lot more privacy requests on how companies handle data, how they move data, how they store it, how they transport it, and how they talk to consumers about what they're doing with their data. So the idea that I really want you guys to walk away with on this slide is privacy is going to become more and more a weekly, if not daily, conversation on the cybersecurity team. Be ready to play in any action. What do I mean by this? Okay, what do I need to know? Why do I care about privacy? Well, I think on the previous slide, I just sort of outlined that. We've got these new legislative efforts. Some of them are already in place. Some of them are about to be in place. But privacy is wonderful. Privacy doesn't mean anything without security. We have got a baseline of security controls around confidentiality, integrity, availability of data. And what we do is we take that baseline or that foundation of those security controls that you all do an amazing job implementing. And then we put privacy concerns on top of it. We talked about those harms. So we take the foundation of the security controls, and then we say, how does data transverse through the organization? How it moves through systems. That's probably the best way I can describe security from a cybersecurity point of view. It's not just about the controls on the server, on the endpoint, up in the cloud. It's understanding how data moves from one system to the other, how it's accessed, how it's modified, and eventually how it's deleted, disposed of, archived, all those other good things we do with data. How can you be ready to address these privacy concerns that I'm bringing up? Well, you're here today, you're at this presentation learning a little bit about privacy. I'm going to talk a little bit about the NIST Privacy Framework in a few minutes. Understanding that privacy controls are becoming more commonplace. Now, I've been saying the word controls quite a bit already. I'm assuming most of you know what that means. I'm talking about safeguards or good things we do to keep things safe and secure. Not only are we familiar with cybersecurity controls, we also have privacy controls. More regulations around privacy. And this is the thing that I've been really learning is I go into organizations and they say, listen, we've got this CPRA from California. We've got more GDPR stuff to deal with. What am I supposed to do? What's happening is privacy used to reside in the legal department. They used to write those privacy policies that none of us actually read, or we just page down, except, come on, you do it just like I do. Fess up. But when it comes to actually communicating with a consumer who says, how are you using my data? I'm now married, remarried. I need to change my name. How are you going to change my name? And what system does it reside on? And do I have to contact marketing and HR and? we're talking about operationalizing data, especially when we need to report back to the consumer how we're using their data. And what I'm seeing is legal teams, compliance teams are saying, we're not security experts like you security people are. We're going to take security operations and we're going to throw it over the fence to you. We want you to do privacy and security operations. So like I said, I'm super glad you're here because I think this is going to become a part of our day-to-day operations. And you're going to be asked to think about privacy and also to be able to articulate security controls as well as privacy controls. So speaking of frameworks, I'm going to talk very briefly on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. Who's using it right now? Anybody? Don't want to admit to it? Some of you do? Okay, excellent. So the NIST Cybersecurity Framework was built by NIST as a tool to be more easily handy, more easy to work with than 853 or some of NIST's other control library frameworks. It was also meant to be able to be customized and a voluntary tool that organizations could use to raise the bar, raise the water level on their cybersecurity maturity. Just real quickly, there's 108 subcategories, 23 controls, 5 domains, 5 target profiles. I'm glad to see a few of you are already using the NIST CSF. If you haven't had a chance to look at it, it's a pretty good framework. Some of the wording's a little odd, but what I think they did absolutely brilliantly on this is they've organized it into domains that anybody can understand. Identify, protect, detect, respond, recover. And it's pictured as a circle, meant that it's a continuous process. You're always trying to move, you're always trying to identify, protect. When the NIST Cybersecurity Framework was created, it was to address not only asset management, business environment, governance, it was also, they left a little placeholder for the privacy framework. This is a relatively new framework, but what I want to point out is it's meant to be a companion or a partner to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework. What you're seeing here, it's represented a little bit differently. Some of the names are the same, like identify, control, communicate, but the P after it just means it's part of the privacy framework. So if you're being asked now to do privacy operations or to do a privacy risk assessment, well, I've got good news for you. If you're already doing the NIST cybersecurity framework, you've done a whole lot of the heavy lifting already. Because as I mentioned, you can't have privacy without security. So the NIST privacy framework was specifically designed to be a bolt-on or an add-on to the CSF. It can stand alone if you want, but they understood that companies needed to already have that baseline or that foundation of their security controls, and that's where the privacy framework was built on top of it. Again, we've got 108 subcontrols, 23 categories, 5 domains, 5 target profiles. Target profiles are, if you're in a particular organization, a particular vertical, you can follow a target profiles. I got mixed feelings about the target profiles. Some organizations find them very helpful. Some find them very annoying. It really depends on your organization. Also, if you've got good controls already in place, a good control library, the target profiles are a little less valuable. So I mentioned that these two frameworks kind of go hand in hand. And if you haven't seen this beautiful Venn diagram from NIST, it kind of shows when you're looking at cybersecurity risks and privacy risks, there is a tremendous amount of overlap, especially in the protect, detect, respond, and recover domains. So if you're in a position where you've been asked to consider more privacy controls, or you're being asked to do more privacy operations, and you're asked, do I need a framework? What framework should I use? This is an easy slide to help have that conversation with business executives, business owners, on why using these two frameworks together is a good idea. Okay, so we're talking about be ready to play, what sort of tools are available. You're a cybersecurity person who's now addressing privacy. I've given you a little bit of background on privacy. We're talking about some of the tools that are available to you. How to build your privacy bench strength is the next topic I'm going to talk about. Like I said, you're here. I'm very grateful you're here at this presentation. How do you move up to the starter position when you're talking about privacy and cybersecurity? right now, understanding the overlap between cybersecurity and privacy frameworks. Keep an ear open for legislative updates. You don't have to spend a whole lot of time. Goodness knows, you and me both have so much to read already when it comes to technical documents and updates and information from vendors. Start thinking about your privacy gap analysis. A simple question I ask people is, do you know where your data is? Data is, data are. I'm not even sure what the right word would be. But you would be surprised how many organizations say, no, we have not done any sort of data inventory yet. Well, how are you able to tell a California consumer how you're using their data if you don't know where their data is? So first of all, I ask you to consider starting with a data inventory if you haven't, and also a data mapping. Perhaps you've done this with HIPAA, knowing where your personal health information is, or you've done it with PCI or some of these other frameworks. But starting to think about where your data is, and also the other thing I really like about this, a lot of organizations have shared drives, have duplicate data. This is a great opportunity when you're doing a data inventory to get rid of all of those duplicate Excel spreadsheets, those Word documents. I was talking to an organization last week. They were going through this data inventory process. They were cleaning up data. They actually decreased their company's data by 5 terabytes, and it wasn't even that big of a company, just by deleting all those extra Excel spreadsheets, those Word documents. So as you're thinking about privacy and where data resides in your organization, do think about that inventory. There are some great automated tools. If you're interested, I can tell you more about it after the presentation. But as you're thinking about how do I become more aware of privacy, how do I build my skill set, how do I become a more valuable member of the team, think about those frameworks. Keep an eye open on the legislative updates. Also, if you anybody here enjoy reading law cases? A few people, maybe. There are some very interesting court cases. If you're trying to understand privacy, there's a big one that just came up. I'm not even sure I can say the word. So Google versus Ramirez, they're revisiting Section 230. Everyone know what Section 230 is? So, okay, yes, now I'm getting political. So Section 230 is, how do we treat Google, Microsoft, people who provide information on the internet? Right now, under Section 230, they are not considered publishers. So they're not held to the same accountability standards as a New York Times or a Washington Post. So the court case, the Supreme Court awarded, this is the word that's hard to say, certiorari, the ability to be heard at the Supreme Court. And this has just come up last week. This is very interesting, especially if you're interested in how an organization like Google or Microsoft responds to information requests, how they respond to taking information down. I think there's going to be some changes once that case is heard by the Supreme Court. But again, if it's something you're interested in, just go ahead, look up those cases. Some other ways to get started, how to build your privacy strength. Determine the appropriate framework. We've already talked about this. Do a gap analysis. What I have up here and is a scorecard for you to assess yourself against the privacy framework. I will have this up on the Audit Scripts framework a little later this week. There was this crazy little storm in Florida called Ian that kind of messed with my life for a week or so. But what it is it's a scorecard that we're giving away to folks to be able to assess where they stand against the privacy framework. What it is you fill out the scorecard. It'll ask about your policies addressing privacy, and as well as the controls that you're implementing it. All you have to do is answer the questions on each of the controls. It'll fill out a nice scorecard, and it'll give you an idea of where you're at. Also, if you're really super interested in it this week, come and see me after the presentation. Give me your email address, and I'll send it out to you. So this is a tool. Also, a little later this year, I'm going to have the scorecard have both the NIST Privacy Framework and the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, so you can see how, how you look against the CSF and privacy on the exact same scoreboard. This is really helpful when you're being asked to do privacy operations, or it's been thrown over the wall to you from compliance or from the legal team. It's a good way to start the conversation. And honestly, it makes you look better and makes you more friends when you say, listen, I've got a tool that can help us. I can help provide information. As we were listening to Alyssa's keynote this morning, what did she say? Be persistent. Have the information, be in front of the board. Wouldn't it be great if you could also say, yeah, I've been following this privacy thing and I have some suggestions for us. It kind of ties together in some of the things that she was saying as well. Privacy special teams, going along with my football analogy, there are very few people who are skilled at privacy engineering or privacy operations. As I come into organizations, a lot of the people I know are very legal focused, or they come from that background. A lot of them are lawyers, general counsel, paralegals. When you ask them to talk about security controls, access control, encryption, MFA, zero trust architecture, their eyes sort of glaze over. So if you've got the ability to, as Alyssa was saying, translate from tech speak to business speak to privacy speak, you would be adding so much value to the organization. And especially this conversation I had a little earlier about privacy harms. Why should we care about privacy? Well, we care about it because it can impact our lives, our families, our communities, and our larger communities like Wild West here today. So the existing privacy group in your organization may not be equipped to have the technology conversation, nor they might not be able to articulate harms. So this is an opportunity for you to rise up, show some interest, show some information, and maybe, I don't know, get a promotion out of it or get a different job title out of it. Okay, scouting. What's going on with the other teams? I've alluded to this a little bit. Different teams and organizations have different functions. Legal. What is privacy to lawyers? I have a little asterisk there. This is the part where I say, I'm not an attorney. I'm not in the bar. I only play one on TV. Even then, sometimes I don't. I am not a lawyer. I'm a geek. But unfortunately, I've had to learn to speak some of their speak as well. They are very concerned about the laws, the regulations, and writing policies. A lot of people think the legal team at their organization is really just a pain in the butt. Their job there is to protect the organization from harm or to reduce harm. So if we look at it that way, when it talks about privacy, they're not equipped to talk about encryption or MFA or access control, but you guys are. That's why I'm saying when you think about the other teams are doing, how you can help them, you bring tremendous resources to a group of people who just don't think the way we do. They think a little bit differently. You may have a compliance team at your organization that deals with privacy. I don't know how many of you have a HIPAA privacy officer and you don't even know what group they work in or what they do. Yeah, that one of the organizations I worked in, the privacy officer was in accounting. I'm like, are you kidding me? What? Why? Well, that's where they've always been. You know, Joe was the bookkeeper accountant and said he would be the privacy officer as well. So compliance, now that we're looking at privacy controls and implementing data governance, we can have these conversations with the compliance team and say, listen, we know you're concerned about the rules and doing the right thing, but we can help you actually do those good things and explain it to you. And also move that focus from less compliance to more good, solid operations. Cybersecurity. I think within the cybersecurity team, you've got a few more controls to deal with, to understand. I really don't think it's that much. You guys have mastered all the other security controls around integrity and confidentiality and availability, all the newfangled technology. The privacy ones really aren't all that different. If you're a developer, there are some very exciting privacy engineering initiatives happening right now. What's privacy engineering? You may have heard the term privacy by design. Basically, this is incorporating privacy principles, avoiding those harms we talked about a little bit as you're developing applications or modifying applications or pushing out new tools for the organization. I have a book up here. It may be a little hard to see in this large room, but it's Strategic Privacy by Design. If you're interested in learning more about designing privacy in your code, in your controls, it's a fabulous book. It just came out about 4 months ago. It is not an easy night read. If you, like me, if you read it right before you go to bed, you might only get through 2 or 3 pages because it's really thick and dense, but it's fascinating. It's a very good book. I highly recommend it. So we talked about how you can interact with other teams, scouting the other teams in your organization. What else are we going to talk about? It's go time. You're up. Okay, so here's my opportunity to summarize what we've talked about. Looking at complementary frameworks, I hope today in this presentation, you got a little feel of privacy, privacy harms, and frameworks that are available. I forgot to mention, this little old thing called ISO. Anybody ISO certified in here? Few of you are? Okay, ISO certification. This wasn't really highly publicized, but there was an update in 2019 to the ISO controls. There is an ISO-specific addendum for privacy. The interesting thing is you cannot be just privacy ISO certified. You have to have 2701 security certification, and you can add privacy on top of that, like an add-on, but you can't be just privacy certified. I just walked through this with an organization. It was really, I hate to say it this way, it was a documentation update. Basically, they created a privacy information management scheme of documentation, just like we had for security. So if that is something that's valuable to you, there are some third parties or contracting organizations that are asking for that ISO privacy certification. But if you're an organization that is doing a lot of business in the European Union, you get a bit of protection by having that ISO privacy certification as well. They assume that you're doing good things and they go on and look at other organizations. What else can you do to be more aware and be a better team player when it comes to privacy? Looking at these control libraries. You can go back to your team meetings and have a little conversation about privacy. You can talk about, here's some things I learned about what privacy is. Here's some words. The word harm, we don't necessarily talk about that in cybersecurity, but it pops up all the time when we're talking about privacy. Share worthy news article, not newsworthy. I switched those around purposely because there's a lot of news out there that is not newsworthy. I just got to say that. So look at the good articles, things about the legislative updates I talked about. Attend a privacy conference. There's a great privacy conference coming up in Washington, D.C. at the end of this month. It is more law focused, but there's a data workshop if you're looking at data governance. If you're familiar with IAPP, that's another great organization. IAPP is the International Association of Privacy Professionals. They've got great articles on everything from privacy program overview to control selection to building a program. They also have a great tool called a state tracker. So if you're interested in what your state is doing with privacy, if there is a comprehensive privacy bill, you can go to IAPP to look at it. Also, you can consider a privacy certification. There's a general privacy certification where you look at laws and regulations. There's a certified privacy manager. Do you know how to organize a program, put it together, have milestones, charters, all those good things we like to organize things with? There's also a privacy technologist certification. So if you're really digging how security and privacy intersects, the IAPP Certified Privacy Technologist certification is very good. I learned a whole bunch of things about technology that I already knew about, like MFA, but with a privacy bent on it. Great certification. So here are some ideas for you to become more privacy familiar in your organization. And I think I'm getting pretty close on time here. And Jeff, do we have any questions from the audience? Ooh.
Check. Oh, here we are. All right. Thanks so much, Kelly. That's a really informative talk. First of all, I had no idea there was so much to the topic. That's fantastic. So anybody in the audience have a question? Now, here's our challenge. The microphone is not roaming, right? It has a cable. So if you have a question, it'd be nice if you could come up here and ask into the mic. Oh, here's one. CJ Cox for a question. Here we go.
Hey, Kelly, I come out of the government's section. And so I did a lot of NIST 853. I've only worked up to Rev 4. I see that Rev 5 has the privacy in that. Is that coordinated with the CSF? And do you have any experience using it?
It is. So the question was, with 853 has some privacy controls in it. CJ was asking if the CSF coordinates with 853 privacy controls loosely. The controls in 853 are good ideas, mostly concepts. But if you really want to look at privacy in terms of harms and data flows, you'll have much more specific technical controls in the privacy framework versus 853. They wanted to address it by not ignoring it, but they didn't want to address it comprehensively. Does that answer your question?
Excellent. Thank you so much. I have one question for you, Kelli, actually. Do you see in the next 12 to 24 months any significant piece of federal legislation actually being passed to update these outdated privacy laws that we have?
I don't think there's going to be any. So the question is, any significant legislation in the next, did you say 12, 24 months? No.
That was easy. Okay. Any other questions for Kelli? All right. Doesn't look like there are any. So thanks so much, Kelli, for your informative talk today.
It's good seeing you all.